Welcome back. Last time we discussed the general overview of the four phases of the development of Islamic philosophy. And now we turn to the first phase on the rise of the Masha'i school and the translation of Greek and other civilizations' texts into Arabic, which will also be very important for our discussion of Islamic science. Now you may be wondering, what were the people doing in Khorasan in Central Asia reading the categories of Aristotle, or Porphyry, or some other philosopher sitting in Athens? How are these things related? In the West, students are taught that you have a continuity from Greece, Rome, to Washington, D.C., which was called the Second Rome in the 19th century. But this is not how history worked. Paradoxically, the Greek intellectual tradition came to the Islamic world before it came to the West. It came to the West from the Islamic world. But geographically, Greece and Italy are right next to each other, so that trajectory seems illogical. We often think of the Islamic world being out there somewhere in the Middle East, while Greece is somewhere in Europe. But we have to rethink these images to understand why the ideas of Aristotle, who lived in Athens, took 1,500 years to go the 90 miles across the Ionian Sea to Italy. What was going on? Why was Aristotle read in the center of Asia before he was read in Padua, just a relatively few miles from Greece? Understanding that will also enable us to understand how Islamic philosophy actually arose. It is said that Athens, and especially Alexandria, did not belong to the Western world at all. They belonged to the Eastern Mediterranean, the Arab and Byzantine world. Ideas came from Egypt and Mesopotamia to Greece and became foundational for Greek philosophy and science, astronomy and the like. And from there, they went to Alexandria, not the West. After Alexander the Great left Greece, it never recovered. It's like the heart of the country came out. That ultimately caused the port city of Alexandria to become a great center of learning, a Greek city amidst an Egyptian country. It was a very metropolitan city and very important for the understanding of Islamic thought. In Alexandria, you had Egyptians, Greeks, and an important Jewish community. The first encounter between Abrahamic thought and Greek philosophy comes not in Islam, but in Judaism with Philo, the great Jewish philosopher of Alexandria, who wrote in Greek, not Hebrew. Paradoxically, the first expression of Greek philosophy in a Semitic language happens in Arabic, and then Hebrew philosophical texts come after Arabic, whereas the Muslims themselves learned a lot from Philo, who lived 600 years before them in Alexandria, because he was concerned with the question of revelation in the Abrahamic sense and in the world of Aristotle and Plato. And because Egypt had been a colony of Persia for some time, there were Persians and Persian influence, and even Indian influence coming up the Red Sea. It was a city in which these elements mixed together and became not Hellenism, but Hellenistic culture. Both terms Hellenic and Hellenistic come from the Greek word elas, meaning light. Anything which is Hellenic we use in the history of philosophy, in the history of science, intellectual history, as belonging to the school of Athens, the classical Greek period, although even that was influenced by Egypt and Mesopotamia. As for Plato, Parmenides, Empedocles, Socrates, Aristotle, Democritus, and others, they belong to the Hellenic period. Then when Alexandria becomes a center, and Athens ceases to be a great center, the culture of Alexandria and its nearby islands was called Hellenistic because it was not only Hellenic, but had other elements in it: Egyptian, Persian, Jewish, Indian. Anyway, Christianity arises and the Byzantines rapidly adopt it. Alexandria becomes one of the great seats of Christianity. But the people in Alexandria have theological differences with the Byzantine Empire, as do the people of Antioch, the other great seat of Christianity. And these theological disputations between the Byzantines in Antioch and Alexandria often led to war. I'm cutting through a great deal of very complicated religious history, but the burning of the Library of Alexandria in the 6th century was ordered by the Byzantine emperor, and the fate of Antioch was even worse. Due to this fighting, Alexandrian philosophy and science moved further and further east, ultimately to Jundashapur, north of Ahwaz in Iran. The Persian Empire was then a major empire stretching from Syria to China, and it opposed the Byzantines. These chips off the block of Christianity, which were opposed by the Byzantine Empire, were welcomed by the Persian Emperor Shapur into the Persian fold. He gave them land and employed them in the city of Jundashapur. Shapur brought many scholars there and supported them, and it became a great intellectual center, arguably the most important center of learning in the world for Greek learning and philosophy. If you wanted to study Greek medicine at the best school in the year 500, you would go to Jundashapur. And so when Islam came upon the scene, all of the great centers of learning of antiquity became part of the Islamic world. Here's a map of the entire region we've been discussing, with Greece, Alexandria, Jundashapur, Baghdad, and Andalusia, to help give you a sense of the geography. You can see Jundashapur directly above the Persian Gulf. So as a result of these events, when Islam opened its eyes towards intellectual life, it had in its midst centers of learning, manuscripts of Greek and other civilizations' philosophy and science, and people who could translate them. And so the Muslims set about the translation of these works from Greek, Syriac, Pahlavi, and Sanskrit into Arabic. The scholars of Jundashapur were invited to Baghdad, the capital of the Islamic Empire at the time, and paid the weight of these translated texts in gold. For example, the works of Ptolemy, the great astronomer, were translated from Greek to Syriac to Arabic. Hippocrates, the father of Greek medicine, didn't go from Greece and jump into Italy. The Hippocratic corpus never reached Italy until the Middle Ages, when the Muslims entered Andalusia, although it was so close. It went from Alexandria to Antioch to Jundashapur to Baghdad, and finally to Andalusia, and was translated from Arabic into Latin. From these 4 major languages, all kinds of works were translated into Arabic. By the year 900, Arabic was the most important philosophical and scientific language in the world. It remains to this day one of the greatest repositories of the learning of the ancient world. This concludes this segment on the movement of centers of learning beginning in Greece and finally coming to Andalusia, and the rise of Arabic as the most important philosophical and scientific language in the world at that time. The question as to why Muslims made these monumentally important translations will be the subject of our next segment.